Good evening and welcome to this special edition on NTV. We are focusing on matters solar and some of the provisions we have in the Finance Bill of 2020, which, by the way, tomorrow will be the last day the National Assembly has to consider some of the proposals before they take effect. Now, data from the 2019 census revealed that 50.4% of households in Kenya rely on electricity supply from the national grid as their main source of lighting. This metric, though impressive by relative standards to sub-Saharan African economies, masks the disparity between rural and urban, with only 26.3% of households in the rural areas relying on the national grid for their lighting. In fact, the census showed that majority of rural households rely on solar for their lighting purposes. To make sense of the electrification landscape in Kenya, I am joined by Aaron Leopold, who is the Chief Executive Officer at African Mini-Grid Developers Association, Patrick Tonui, who serves as the East Africa representative at the Global Association of Off-Grid Solar Energy, that is GOGLA, and finally Peter Scott, who is the CEO and co-founder at Ban Manufacturing, which focuses on GECO. Gentlemen, welcome on set. And let's just get to the elephant in the room, the proposal that we should have VAT exemption withdrawn from a number of solar equipments has been an emotive issue. I should clarify this point, that the Budget and Appropriations Committee has proposed that that be deleted, but still this matter goes to the floor of the House tomorrow. Aaron, let me start with you. What are your thoughts on this very briefly?
Yeah, so the African Mini-Grid Developers Association represents community-scale energy companies that are electrifying rural Kenya in a way that's never been possible before. And the reason why this has never been possible before is because solar has never been affordable before the last couple of years to do this. That's why the off-grid solar sector has boomed. And we understand that the government of Kenya is in a challenging position at the moment, looking to increase tax revenues. But right now, what this tax exemption removal amounts to is a taxation on this job creation, on this service provision in rural areas. So we understand that it's an important issue. We just feel like the timing is not the best because we have the energy access, universal energy access objectives in 18 months' time that's running out. We have the Big Four agenda, and energy is at the core of all of these things. So we understand that this is a key fundamental issue for the government of Kenya, but it's at the heart of other objectives, and we're urging the government to reconsider this VAT exemption removal because of that.
Let me cross over to Patrick Tonui, and just picking up from what Leopold has raised, clearly it's an extraordinary circumstance here, and the challenge that the government faces is that in light of the such circumstances, it has given a number of incentives, a number of relief measures, and therefore it is trying to claw back. And a number of sectors have taken a hit. If you look at manufacturing, the capital allowances have been massively scaled back. Don't you think the government perhaps has a point in terms of the give and take we should be having here, Patrick?
Yes, I think the government may have a point, but I think what we need to be careful is to look at the big picture. The government is trying to raise this revenue because it also has public priorities that it is undertaking. And one of those priorities that they're actually borrowing money for is the delivery of the 2022 universal access target. I think we're all aware, I think last week they even signed another agreement with the World Bank for more money to go towards the electrification program. But these tax incentives and exemptions that they've been giving to the sector are also the same incentive that they're giving towards that program. And when we look at the numbers as GOGLA, you can look at what it costs to actually give somebody an electric connection using the grid, which is about 100,000 shillings per connection, versus giving a very small tax exemption to the people that are not being reached by the grid. And for us, the number of households that will be reached for that is a factor of 10. 10 times more people will be reached if they allow this, just foregoing taxes on this, rather than the government going to borrow money that they have to again pay with interest and all that to give electricity to people that, and at the same time, these are people who will still not be reached by the grid. So it's for us, it's an investment in grid electrification. In energy access.
Great point. And let me just circle now to Peter Scott. Patrick seems to be suggesting that the trade-off here does not make sense. If you look at the social impact that will be foregone in the name of mopping up more revenue by way of taxes, it doesn't just make sense. Do you agree with that view, Peter?
Yeah, 100%. It doesn't make any sense because, obviously the government has a policy to promote clean cooking stoves. So Ministry of Energy, for example, has a target of producing 2 million or supporting the sale of 2 million cook stoves. So by raising the VAT or putting the VAT back on, it's going to put these GECOs out of the price reach of many people in Kenya. And so the actual amount of revenue that they'll generate from putting VAT is relatively small. Last year we sold about 150,000 stoves, which would have given them about 50 million shillings. This year our plan was to double that to 300,000 GECOs, and that still would have only helped them raise 100 million shillings. So it's a tiny amount of money when we're looking at the hole in the Kenyan budget for 2021. So, and then when you look at all the negative impacts of putting that VAT on, is that because people can't afford it, then what are they going to do? They're going to go back to using like a Juakali stove, which doesn't have any VAT on it, so the government won't get any revenue, and they'll go to use a product that's extremely inefficient, that's going to lead to increased indoor air pollution at a time when COVID is raging across the country, and it's so important that people have positive in respiratory health. So, and just a little bit of background about Burn is that Burn set up in Kenya to do full 100% local manufacturing, and so since 2014 we've sold almost 1 million GECOs. And the reason that we've been able to be so successful is because the government has had really supportive policies, from duty to VAT to a number of things, that have allowed us to invest over 1.5 billion shillings in setting up our operation here and creating this as the hub for the whole continent. So we see this as, it's a big step back to put VAT on cook stoves. And so, yeah, we would really, beseech the Treasury and the President to think again about taking the VAT or leaving VAT off of cook stoves.
Let me come back to Aaron. And Aaron, I've got to be honest with you. I've spoken to a couple of parliamentarians who have indicated or suggested to me that there is no way that this proposal to withdraw the VAT exemption is going to be thrown out, because clearly this is a very pressing situation for the government. What next should this sail through?
Sorry, what next should what do? Sorry?
Should Parliament actually pass the proposal that we should do away with all this VAT exemption for this solar equipment? What next for you as an industry?
For the industry, no matter what happens, the sector is going to push forward. We're in a growth phase where the companies that we're working with and representing are able to raise investment to push into rural areas, but it's just going to make it that much harder and that much more expensive. And the irony of this whole situation is, as Peter mentioned, the government has just signed a new agreement with the World Bank to specifically bring the technologies that are now being taxed into the underserved and marginalized northern and eastern counties of Kenya. So about half of the entire country has been slated to be primarily electrified by these very technologies that are going to be taxed now. But they're going to become much more affordable and make the government's own objectives harder to achieve. Nonetheless, we're very dedicated to remain partners with the government in these efforts and are going to do our best to keep pushing forward. We're looking at what options exist for us to push back against the VAT more formally, working with Parliament. We're hoping to talk to the Office of the President, etc. So we're always looking for opportunities to be those partners in progress, even through these challenging times.
Great points there raised by Aaron regarding the way forward. And we take a short break here. We'll be coming back with a lot more on this discussion. Welcome back to this special edition on NTV Kenya, where we are focusing on electrification and how the country can advance the agenda of pushing this into the most marginalized areas. And a lot of feedback coming on social media. And before the break, I was speaking to Aaron. Let me just move to Patrick. The question here is, there is so much disparity between the urban and rural areas. What are some of the proposals you would table in terms of how this can be addressed, Patrick?
So, it is very true. I think if you look at the 2019 census report from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, it showed that Kenya's electrification rate, yes, is about just over 70%, but the grid itself is just over 50%, and that 20% is coming from solar and other solutions. But what's really interesting, and if I was any MP out there, I would really go back and look at the statistics for your constituency. And we are seeing that there are some constituencies that are as low as 12, 13, 14%. I think the lowest is about 9%, which is a constituency in Turkana. And there are very many places in Kenya, even places you'd be surprised that are close to urban areas, that are still below 20%, below 30%. So the grid is not reaching very many communities because of cost, because of many reasons. But at the same time, the Ministry of Energy and Kenya was a leader in adopting what's been called integrated electrification planning. So they've identified that, yes, you have to, without the resources to bring the grid everywhere, and the grid may not make sense to take it everywhere, you include mini grids, you include solar home systems or standalone systems, because using those technologies, you can still make sure that you give everybody access to energy that allows them to do what they need, charge a cell phone, run a TV. In fact, today under COVID, we as an industry, there are some households that their kids are learning and following their curriculum from the Ministry of Education using solar systems. So the ministry has done its bit to plan for how to give electricity to this country or energy using this mix of grid versus non-grid. But what we need also is now to see that these in our, not just paper, but also in our fiscal plans and everything else that is adopted, because we as Gogla, we cover we work across Africa, and I cover East Africa.
Yes.
And the biggest thing we're seeing is affordability.
Okay.
We need to keep the prices down. So these taxes is one of the core components. If it's introduced VAT, it's 14% more, and we have the statistics to show that it will bring down demand in Kenya by about 40,000 households a year.
I see.
And that is big.
Crossing over to Peter, Patrick has spoken about the aspect of affordability, and let's just delve deeper into this in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. How has this impacted, because you are on the side of the market where you are putting a product for people to purchase, how has this been impacted by COVID-19?
Well, as of now, we haven't been terribly impacted by COVID, which has been great. I mean, obviously, again, people are concerned about indoor air pollution and clean cooking during this period of time. So we've actually seen that demand has been quite strong. And of course, there's not VAT on GECOs at the moment, so that it's actually, so they're, again, it's been affordable for them. Yeah, I think, what's one interesting thing to note here is that I think some people had talked about putting VAT back onto cook stoves in the idea that it would help local manufacturing. So I guess we just want to be clear that actually it will have a punitive impact on local manufacturing, because we won't be able to sell as many GECOs because people won't be able to afford them, whether it's during COVID or after COVID. And I think what's sort of interesting about this urban and rural question as well is, it's good that they took VAT off of LPG, but when, some of the stoves that we sell burn makaa or kuni, so the jiko koa or the kuni koa. And so for the people like the urban poor or the rural poor, this putting VAT on cook stoves is going to be highly punitive to them. And again, we talked before about it's not going to generate a lot of revenue for Treasury. We did a study recently with a number of universities in the United States, and it said for every GECO that Burn makes, people spend about 4,000 shillings on it, but the benefit to Kenya is 100,000 shillings in reduced deforestation, reduced climate emissions, reduced expenses for households. So it's really again it's not sort of it's not working towards even the Kenyan government stated goals. Like, for example, the Big Four agenda.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that once they look at the facts of the matter, of course it makes sense to then leave VAT off of GECOs.
Aaron, Peter has spoken about the immediate impact or the experience as it is right now in terms of COVID-19, and he says the impact is not as adverse as perhaps many of us would have imagined. But let's talk about the long-run effects, because this is not, COVID is not a flash in the pan, that's the truth, and it's something which is bound to have spillover effects over a long time. Just share with us some thoughts from your end.
Yeah, I mean, COVID-19 is a huge question mark, right? I think the biggest challenge is the uncertainty that it creates. And it's creating uncertainty for everyone. And for people trying to run a business, for people trying to create jobs, for people trying to keep their employees employed, the uncertainty is the biggest issue. What we don't know is how long this is going to last, if there's going to be another wave of this, etc. But what we do know is, the way to keep people employed is to help create opportunities for job growth, for opportunities for working at home, for having businesses running, etc. And I think in the energy sector, we're really at the heart of this. So just moving away from the VAT issue, bringing energy to rural health clinics is unbelievably important. one of the biggest preparation exercises a country can do is to prepare its health clinics in the periphery for this oncoming pandemic, right? But the peripheral health clinics can only be so prepared if they have no electricity. Vaccines require a cold chain. If a vaccine gets above a certain temperature at any point in time for more than a day or so, the vaccine will go bad. So this means inherently, in the vast majority of Kenya, people do not have access to health facilities that could even carry a vaccine when we get it. So I think that energy could be such a help in preparing for and avoiding the hardest hit or the hardest impacts of this crisis. And we could do that in a way that is delivering on government objectives, that is bringing services to the rural poor, and that is creating jobs. And again, this is really, the energy is sort of at the heart of things. You know, if you're a journalist or a teacher or a doctor or whomever, you know, you're communicating, you're charging your phone, you're writing your articles, you're practicing your work with energy at the heart. But if you don't have it, you can't do so much. So I think regardless of the uncertainty here, we have to remember that this issue that we're talking about is not really a selfish industry issue. This sector only exists because of the development impacts, really. You know, Patrick's organization and my organization, they're all social enterprises. They're all here with a mission. Yeah. And this is going to make that mission much harder.
I see. And Patrick, there's a very interesting question coming out here that the three of you seem to be in agreement that the government has for a long time had a very favorable policy for the kind of businesses you operate. And the question is, don't you think you have been incubated enough, quote and unquote, and perhaps it is time that you take up this burden without necessarily passing it on to the end consumer?
I think that is, it's a fair question. It's a really good question to ask. But I think what everybody needs to understand, right, is where do we play? We as an industry are selling and are trying to bring products to consumers who are rural, who are off-grid, who even the government has said we cannot bring grid to them. It doesn't make sense, it's not financially viable, it's too expensive for different reasons. And these are generally the lower income, the poorer people, communities that are very hard to serve. And this is not just a question that we're seeing in Kenya, but as I said, across all the developing countries. So for us, it's not a question of saying, we are making money. I think anybody who looks at the industry and tries to determine, is this industry yet at a point where it is companies are making profits and doing all that, we are still very much an industry that is going to impact investors and to other people who are invested and trying to support social economic development here and saying invest in us because we think we've got a solution that can tap private sector capital to reach these communities and make sure that they can do it in a way without adding to public expenditure. So anything that they add, right, it is going to say, because taxes and any cost that comes from government has to be priced into the cost of the product. So the question is, are you going to make it expensive for your rural citizens, the ones that even you are struggling to reach, to get access to a clean energy, or are you trying to invest to keep those products as low? It's the same argument we're using in why do you not tax medical services? Why do you not tax other things that are essential? And if we're really serious about bringing access to energy to our communities, then we should all be really working to keep that cost as low as possible. Kenya has been leading this and a lot in this regard for a long time. Other countries are coming to ask this, what has Kenya done?
Yes.
And really the conversation is about bringing costs down. And we as an industry, we are trying also to bring the costs down.
Okay. Peter, I'm curious to know your take on the same question. Do you think this is something you can comfortably absorb the cost without passing it on to the end consumer? Because if your agenda is really social impact, then definitely at the bottom of the pyramid, you still want to maintain that impact.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we operate on razor-tight margins. We're just barely break even now. I mean, as you can see, I cannot even afford a haircut. And so, you know, it's very... Sorry, that's a joke. I'm not sure if that works. Yeah, it's really it's not possible for us to just absorb that. absorb that cost because of the very tight margins. And so, we've invested, again, 1.5 billion shillings, and we've yet to turn a profit on that. So, my investors won't be are not very happy with this now. And if we have, lower sales because of higher pricing, because of the VAT, it's going to be even more of a negative outlook for us at Burn. So, yeah, it's not possible.
Aaron, just on the same question, because Peter here says, of course, the cash burn rate is still high. You're not turning a profit yet. What's your view, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, the mini-grid sector is sort of where these guys were a couple of years ago. So they're getting started. And they're getting started doing probably the most complicated thing in the sector, which is putting, $100,000 pieces of high-tech equipment in some of the poorest, most remote, and difficult to reach communities in the world. Not just here, but across the continent. And I think if you go to NCBA or any of the banks here in Nairobi, none of them will know the companies that we represent in the mini-grid sector because they're not interesting, because they're not highly profitable. As Patrick and Peter both said, these are companies that are struggling to survive, that are struggling to get investment, and they're doing a very noble thing right now, and this is a huge roadblock in front of them. I think one of the most interesting things that the mini-grid sector is doing to bring profitability to itself is the only reason, or the only way rather, that a mini-grid company can be profitable is if the community itself is doing better and better every year, because mini-grid companies have to sell electricity. And in order to sell electricity, the people have to be doing something with it. So rural communities across Africa that are served by mini-grid companies are being served by electricity companies that have veterinarians and agricultural scientists on staff. They're doing micro-business planning. They're doing micro-loans, all to bring rural economic empowerment to these communities, to create a sort of a circle, a positive, virtuous circle, where once the community starts doing better, then the energy company does better, then jobs are created, then taxes are paid. And so actually, this whole process will create the exact impact that, as you were asking before, the long-term impact that the government is hoping to have. It's through this positive spiral of job creation and empowerment in these rural communities that cannot happen if the rug is pulled out from under them at this moment.
Gentlemen, we have about 5 minutes to go, and I'm just curious to know, in terms of your take-home point, if there's one thing you would propose to the government at this particular point. Patrick, if I could start with you. Of course, Aaron here is talking about the virtuous cycle that the industry has. What is the one proposal you would table in light of the industry and the situation we are facing?
I think what I would put is take a hard look at the economic impact that this industry contributes, and take a look at why, both at the global level, but also Kenya has committed to delivering universal energy access, because it really contributes to the social and economic development. We have the data to show that if you provide a household or individuals with access to modern energy, they are able to start businesses and earn income and contribute to their own economic development. And therefore, this is an enabler. And when you have an enabler that has multiply effect, you want more of it. And honestly, the potential revenue completely is far below the economic impact and contribution to both the government's goals and the social economic targets for this country. This industry doesn't make money to the point that our economic contribution far supersedes any potential revenue that numbers that could come from this.
Peter, Patrick there is talking about the multiplier effect that the industry has, but the truth here is the government is facing a very dicey position here in terms of balancing its expenditure versus its revenue. What is the one thing you would say to the government if you're given a chance?
Well, I'd probably just reiterate the point that I made earlier, that the amount of revenue that they're going to get from putting VAT on cook stoves is tiny, so maybe 50 to 100 million shillings, but the negative impact for the economy, for the forests, for climate, for local manufacturing, it's the impact of that will just dwarf this 50 to 100 million shillings that they might get just from putting VAT on cook stoves. So, in fact, we were planning on launching a whole new product line, that's this mass market product line that was going to sell for 2,000 shillings. But now, and we've seen that going to that price, we see a 3x to 5x increase in sales. But now by putting VAT on that small that relatively may seem like a small difference, we actually see that as a big drop in the volume of sales that we'll expect. So it's going to be it's going to be a loss for everyone. So yeah, we'd strongly encourage them to rethink putting VAT back onto cook stoves and G-codes.
Aaron, your take?
Yeah, I would say one point that we haven't really brought up is in fact the climate point that Peter mentioned just briefly. You know, we've seen how unpredictable the rains are, how long they've lasted, how long the dry periods have lasted in the last couple of years, and how everything is sort of like shifted unpredictably a couple of months. You know, renewable energy is the solution to this problem. It's the solution to the rural empowerment challenge. It's the solution to indoor air pollution that's killing so many people. And so we're really putting a tax on the solution here. And I think the biggest challenge in this respect is really that the government has for some reason taken a stance where they see the renewable energy companies as competition to state-run services. But really we're just trying to be partners in helping solve this greater societal challenge of how to lift everyone up. And I think that all we want to do is be seen as partners. And so if my one request to the government would be anything, it would be that. You know, we have the last mile connectivity program that's funded by the World Bank and previously by the African Development Bank that's helping Kenya Power go into more rural and remote areas. But the problem is each connection that Kenya Power makes is more and more expensive and more difficult to service. And we know that Kenya Power is therefore being stretched right now. And what we have to offer is a bottom-up approach to that top-down perspective. You know, where they meet in the middle is that handshake, is that partnership. And that's what we're looking to do here. And I think that if we can work together to walk back this VAT issue, it would be a great step in forming that partnership and helping us all achieve our goals that much quicker.
Right, we have about a minute to go, and just one final question which I should ask because it's coming from our social media platform. The question is, energy policy is still largely within the central government. Do you feel that devolved governments have any role to play as far as facilitating this is concerned? Very quickly, Patrick, starting with you briefly.
Absolutely, yes. I think under one of the programs run by Ministry of Energy, the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project, particularly the ASAL counties that are in that program are fully embracing and supporting this. And they've been an enabler, and I think they have been an important partner and will continue to be an important partner.
Peter, very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, the Kenyan government has done an amazing job creating an enabling environment, which has brought investment and brought really cutting-edge technology to Kenya. So we strongly support them to continue that and to continue to be a world leader in creating enabling environments.
Aaron, the final comments?
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example of when the counties could really shine. You know, it is, look at Marsabit and Turkana, look to the eastern counties where it's very clear that Kenya Power, you know, physically cannot get there very quickly. And so it's the perfect moment for the counties to rise up very loudly to say that, you know, we can help, we can do this planning with you and collaborate in the bottom-up, top-down way that I had described before. So I think this is a great opportunity to work on the devolution that we've all been talking about for years and start to see it really happen.
Great, and that point takes us to the end of this conversation. Now we just wait tomorrow to see what happens on the floor of the House regarding the Finance Bill of 2020, a number of proposals which have been quite contentious this particular year. Many thanks to Aaron Leopold, many thanks to Patrick Tonui, as well as Peter Scott for helping us shape our thoughts around this conversation, and to the viewer for sending us feedback on social media. I have been your host, Mboko Julians. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more on programming.